Hi, I thought that I would try something different today instead of it being so formal. Before I get started, thank you for stopping by. This is the Internal Executive, where we explore the many choices we're faced with using the wisdom of those who have gone before us. Of course, there is no client-provider relationship here. All info is provided for educational and entertainment purposes only. I'm trying to build a channel where we have an array of contributors from the past. Eric Byrne is one of my favorites. However, he's not the only one with good content for creating a good life. So today I wanted to talk about conscientiousness of all things. There's an old-timey saying, and it goes something like this. For the man who thinks, life is a comedy, and for the man who feels, life is a tragedy. And it seems like the trend has been for at least the culture, the Western culture, to emphasize feelings at our own detriment. And I thought it would be fun to explore the relationship between morality, logic, and feelings through the lens of conscientiousness. So conscientiousness is, the modern definition apparently is orderliness, compliance with rules, things like that. But it used to be about knowing your morals. To be conscientious was to be conscious of the moral framework that you adhered to. And of course, cultures were more homogeneous, perhaps less diverse in what people agreed upon was the correct morality. But that doesn't change the definition of the word and the benefits of developing one's conscientiousness from an old-timey definition perspective alongside that logic, that internal adult, and allow oneself to protect that inner child. Because what happens if we don't have self-awareness or we haven't decided what is going to rule us, we end up hurting ourselves and those that love us. So I thought it would be interesting to just off the cuff talk a little bit about that and get some feedback from viewers regarding their experiences or what they think works best, or if there's more questions. So to be conscientious, the word means to know. It means to have a code, right? First and foremost, to have a moral code. And we typically, most people have an awareness, at least, of what our parents' moral code was, or the home that we grew up in. And then most people go through a process somewhere in, early teens through early adulthood of challenging their parents' values and then reorganizing that into their own version of a conscious or somewhat conscious critical parent of their own making that is heavily influenced by their family of origin and more by the community at large as we're randomized by and exposed to, online stuff. We're bombarded. So conscientious to know. And so that requires reflection and analysis now with so much diversity of thought and values out there. And then to be logical, we would, that would certainly benefit, right? While you analyze what is moral. It's like, well, maybe we need to define the terms and then apply logic to the scenarios that trouble us. Because there's nothing, you can't unring the bell. If we make a decision in our youth that we later learn or determine was immoral and hurt those around us, we can try to let ourselves off the hook, but if we hurt people, they're still hurt. So in terms of relationships, in terms of self-esteem, self-satisfaction, to develop the skills would then to a happier, a more positive life over the long run, right? As you build relationships and people learn to trust you because you have integrity, and it's not because you're rigid, but because you've done the work and your actions follow your statements about being a good person or trying to be a good person, trying to do the right thing. People who just say the words like an actor but don't do the internal work end up falling flat when life gets hard, and then people don't trust them and they lose relationships, or emotions overwhelm and that hurt child runs amok because the moral self didn't rein it in. And then, of course, part of that is a duty to taking care of yourself. I mean, I think that is pretty well versed in the in the modern culture to take care of oneself, but morality, we're all people, and so balancing what you owe to yourself against what you owe to others is super important. And then, when you know what's true about yourself, you're able to communicate that to potential friends, to potential business partners, and to potential life partners. Hence, you're not unpredictable, you're trustworthy. You say you are. Now, the big reason I wanted to talk about this today was as I was doing some research on why conscientiousness, the definition of it, changed over time. What came up in my research is that loneliness is diminished or is affected by one's conscientiousness as we look at it from the old definition. And the explanation that came up in the research was that loneliness as a result of being alone and feeling lonely would be a consequence of either not knowing oneself and so feeling like there's no one with you, or avoiding yourself because you don't want to face what maybe goes against some ill-defined morals. I can't say for certain that that's true, but I think it's an interesting thought experiment to explore. They talk about narcissists not being lonely, but always needing an audience. A lot of that is out there. Again, people vary in what they need and in their wounding and what needs to be repaired. But the whole point of the internal executive is to become self-aware and rely on material that has maybe stood the test of time or was potentially less politically motivated. I don't know. But when you apply logic to hopefully what I present, it makes sense and supports a theory that this way of thinking would result in greater happiness. So to be conscientious is to be trustworthy, and when you trust yourself because you've done the work, you know what you're going to do, you know what the right thing to do is, and then you're conscientious enough to include development of pursuing healthier coping skills so that you may be more available, more nurturing, more loving to those who love you. Boy, what a great little ecosystem you might create. Right now, there's, of course, other people, and they may not be as interested in that. I think that's where the other loneliness might come from, is being with people who don't see you as a person with your own needs, wants, and desires, but as an object to give them the audience they want or the affirmation they seek or something else. The list is, but then again, you're going to feel lonely in their presence because you're trapped with them, but they're treating you like you're not you. And so I think the development of an internal conscientiousness, I think understanding that could be why you feel lonely in someone else's presence, that there's a mismatch in the development of a moral code and an understanding of other people's own identity. Sometimes there's other reasons. I mean, there's some interesting stuff in the world of traumatic brain injury and attention deficit disorder and things like that. If you've developed some conscientiousness, you will seek discernment in determining what's going on with the people around you before you hurl accusations, right? Because logically, what's going on around us may or may not align with how our emotions are responding, because, as I'll probably talk about in another podcast, emotional response is very closely linked to our histories, our expectations, both in terms of what we're entitled to and the patterns we've experienced. If, 9 times out of 10, when someone told us we need to talk, it meant bad news or a breakup or being, chewed out or something. We're not going to like that phrase, but that's the emotional response. Then the nurturing parent might say, hold on, look for a greater bit of knowledge here, but pay attention because you deserve to be protected in the relationship. You don't deserve to be emotionally wounded. That's the kind of thing a nurturing parent would say. But the logical person, you might just jump right over to logic and say, well, it has always meant something bad, but this person is a new person and they've never said this to me before, so I'm going to look at other signals and then just see and be prepared, but not attached to whatever they're going to say. And I'll just deal with it when I get more data. Right? That would be the logical response. Now, the moral response might be, well, it would be based on what the duty you have to that person, how much respect you owe them, how you're supposed to respond based on what they say. The moral code comes from that conscientious self, that moral code, which is more than just integrity. But that's probably the closest word. Logic will dictate what's pragmatic for your end goals. Morality will dictate what the right thing to do is, regardless of how you feel. And your child self will just react, without inhibition if the other parts of your psyche are not in play. So this is why being conscientious is very important. It keeps you from being overly emotional or inappropriately emotional in situations where there's no benefit, right? So I don't know. I thought it would be fun to talk about, hear what other people think about this way of thinking. Certainly open to hearing about Stoicism and hedonism, because those concepts are tied closely to this concept. And, what Western civilization, and I'm speaking to that because that is the one I was raised in, has a long, rich history of philosophical debate, of understanding what is good and what is moral and what is right. So anyway, I do appreciate you stopping by. If you like what you heard, hit the like and subscribe buttons. And then, I guess we'll catch you next time. Thanks for stopping by.